My name is Daniel Osei. I am 24 years old, and I am the reason my brother will never run again. At 24, I've learned the most devastating lesson of my life. Some risks can never be undone. I'm from Lagos, Nigeria. I'm 24 years old, the firstborn of 3 kids, and I've always carried the weight of being the man of the house. Growing up without a father meant that I had to mature faster than most boys my age. Our mom, Mrs. Sarah Osei, is a primary school teacher who works long hours just to put food on the table. I've always known that it's my responsibility to look after my younger siblings, 17-year-old Jacob and 10-year-old Blessing. This story isn't about how much I love my family. It's about the one time I failed them when it mattered most, and it cost us more than I could have imagined. Growing up in Lagos, Nigeria without a father wasn't just about missing a parent. It was about carrying an invisible burden that pressed down on my shoulders from the moment my dad disappeared when I was 7. My mother, Sarah, never spoke about him, but I saw the pain etched in the lines around her eyes, in the way her hands would tremble slightly when she graded her students' papers late at night. I became the phantom father figure, not by choice, but by necessity. While other teenage boys worried about football matches and first crushes, I was calculating how to stretch our monthly food budget, negotiating with landlords, and ensuring my younger siblings, Jacob and Blessing, never felt the sharp edges of our financial struggle. Jacob was different from me. He was all light and promise. Where I was serious and calculating, he was spontaneous and dreaming. He'd sprint through our tiny apartment, his laughter echoing off the worn walls, talking about Olympic medals and international track competitions. Blessing would watch him with wide-eyed adoration, believing every impossible dream he conjured. Our mother, Mrs. Sarah Osei, was a primary school teacher whose dedication was matched only by her resilience. She worked from dawn to dusk, her modest salary a lifeline that kept us just inches away from complete desperation. I watched her sacrifice everything, her health, her dreams, her youth, to ensure we had a chance at something better. It all started when Jacob began complaining about a sharp pain in his leg. At first, we brushed it off as one of those minor aches that teenagers get from growing too fast. But there was something different about this pain, a sharpness that made him go pale, a persistence that whispered of something more sinister. "It feels like someone is drilling into my bone," he would say, his usually bright eyes clouded with suffering. One night, he couldn't even walk to the bathroom without crying out. Our tiny one-room apartment became a landscape of tension. My mother would sit at the edge of Jacob's makeshift bed, her hands gentle but trembling, checking his temperature, massaging his leg, hoping against hope that it was just a passing ailment. But hope is a fragile thing in Lagos, especially for a family living on the razor's edge of survival. We went to the hospital. The hospital was a cacophony of sounds and smells, antiseptic mixed with desperation, whispered prayers intertwining with the beeping of medical machines. When the doctor explained Jacob's condition, his words hit us like a sledgehammer. Jacob had developed a severe bone infection, osteomyelitis they called it. If we didn't act fast and get him surgery, the infection would spread, and he could lose his leg. The world seemed to collapse around me. The cost of the surgery was $700,000, about $900, an amount we didn't have. My mom tried to borrow from her workplace, but the process would take weeks. And Jacob didn't have that kind of time. $700,000, a sum that might as well have been $1 million. In that moment, I saw Jacob's dreams crumbling, his track medals, his athletic scholarship hopes, his entire future balanced on a financial knife edge. I looked at my brother lying in that hospital bed, writhing in pain, and I made a decision. I had to find that money. Around that time, I'd been hanging out with a group of friends who introduced me to sports betting. They always seemed to be winning big, flashing their cash, and acting like life was a game they'd already mastered. I wasn't really into it. I thought it was risky and foolish. But that night, when I saw Jacob's condition getting worse, I convinced myself that this was the solution. My mother's savings were $500,000, hard-earned money saved through years of grading papers after school, of taking extra tutoring jobs, of denying herself even the most basic comforts. We were just $200,000 short of saving Jacob's leg. just a fraction away from preserving his dreams. I withdrew the $500,000 my mom had scraped together for the surgery, telling her I'd found someone willing to lend us the remaining $200,000 if I brought cash immediately. It was a lie. Instead, I went to a betting shop on the outskirts of our neighborhood. The betting shop was a den of false promises and desperate energy. Men hunched over screens, their eyes feverish, chasing that one magical moment that would transform their lives. I had always scorned this world, seeing it as a trap for the weak and the desperate. But desperation has a way of rewriting one's moral compass. My hands were shaking as I placed the bet. I chose a football accumulator, 5 matches with high odds. If I won, I'd triple the money. We'd have enough for Jacob's surgery, and even some left over to ease my mom's burden and give Blessing better opportunities. For the next 2 hours, I was glued to my phone, watching the live scores. The first 3 matches went exactly as predicted, and I began to feel a spark of hope. This might actually work, I remember thinking. I could already see Jacob's future reshaping itself. His legs saved, his dreams intact. Pride mixed with hope, a dangerous cocktail that blinded me to the fragility of my plan. But then the 4th match, Manchester United versus a smaller team, took a turn. A last-minute goal shattered my accumulator. My heart sank. Everything was gone. I can't describe the feeling. It was as if someone had reached into my chest and ripped out my soul. $500,000, gone in an instant. Jacob's surgery money, gone. I couldn't go back to the hospital immediately. I couldn't face my mom. Instead, I wandered the streets of Lagos aimlessly, replaying my decision over and over in my head. What had I done? How could I have been so reckless? By the time I returned to the hospital, it was too late. My mom was sobbing in the waiting room. Jacob had been moved to a ward for patients awaiting amputation. The infection had spread too far. When I told her what I'd done, the look on her face crushed me. It wasn't just anger. It was disappointment. "How could you gamble with your brother's life?" she whispered. I didn't have an answer. The hospital corridor felt like an endless tunnel of judgment. My mother's eyes, those same eyes that had always looked at me with pride, with hope, now held something I had never seen before, a complete, profound disappointment. Jacob's leg was amputated a week later. The amputation was more than a medical procedure. It was the surgical removal of potential, of dreams, of everything he had worked towards. Watching him wake up from surgery and realize what had happened was the hardest moment of my life. When he first saw his prosthetic leg, the silence was more devastating than any scream could have been. He didn't yell or cry, he just stared at me with this emptiness in his eyes. "Why, Daniel?" he asked. "Why did you let this happen?" I wanted to tell him I thought I was helping. I wanted to say I was trying to save him. But I knew that would sound hollow. I didn't just lose money that day. I lost my brother's trust, my mother's faith, and Jacob's potential. Blessing still looks at me, her eyes still holding a child's unconditional love. But I see the questions forming, the understanding slowly dawning that her hero brother is fallible, deeply and irreparably human. Now, every time I see Jacob struggling with his prosthetic leg, I feel like I'm suffocating. Every step he takes with his prosthetic leg is a constant reminder of my singular, catastrophic mistake. I ruined his future. He was the fastest runner in his school, a star on the track team with dreams of competing internationally. I took that from him. His track and field medals, once proudly displayed in our tiny apartment, now seemed like relics of a life that no longer existed. I don't expect anyone to understand. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm sharing this because I can't keep carrying this alone. I gambled with my brother's life, and I lost. Every day I ask myself, was I desperate or just selfish? Did I believe I was helping, or did I just want to play the hero? Some mistakes I've learned cannot be bet away. They can only be carried. I know I deserve judgment, but that's not why I'm here on the listening room. I'm here because the weight of this secret is too much for me to bear. We listen, we don't judge, right? My name is Daniel Harrison, and I live in the quiet suburban neighborhood of Maple Grove, a place where lawns are always trimmed, Mailboxes stand straight and everyone pretends to get along. At least, that's what it looks like from the outside. But beneath the polished surface, we were a collective of fractured souls, each harboring secret frustrations, unspoken resentments that simmered just below the veneer of civility. We were a community built on mutual tolerance, where genuine connection was sacrificed at the altar of peaceful coexistence. Neighbors exchanged pleasantries with practiced smiles that never quite reached their eyes. Meanwhile, we're a boiling pot of grievances, fake smiles, and muffled complaints. I was no different, as I've just become the monster of our street. If there's anything I have learnt these past few months, it's that silence can be more deafening than any bark. It started 6 months ago when the Thompsons moved in next door. They were a young couple, Mark and Sarah, with a little boy named Ethan, who was about 7 or 8. The Thompsons were polite enough, waving from their driveway and occasionally chatting about the weather. But their dog, Max, was another story entirely. Max was a large German shepherd, a towering beast with a bark that could wake the dead, and he barked at everything. It wasn't just the volume. It was the unpredictability, a car passing, a leaf falling. The mere suggestion of movement would trigger a cacophonous response that made my nerves feel like frayed electrical wires. Day and night, it was non-stop. His presence seemed to violate the unwritten rules of our carefully curated street. Where other dogs might have been trained to whisper, Max seemed intent on shouting his existence to the world. At first, I tried to be understanding. I told myself it was part of living in neighborhood, that dogs bark and kids play, and sometimes life is noisy. But as the weeks dragged on, the barking wore me down. Max's bark wasn't just a sound, it was a psychological weapon, a relentless assault that dismantled my carefully constructed sense of tranquility. I approached the Thompsons about it once, casually. "Hey Mark," I said, leaning over the fence. "That dog of yours has quite the voice. Any chance you could keep him a little quieter at night?" Mark smiled sheepishly. "Yeah, sorry about that. Max gets a bit excitable, but he's harmless. We'll try to keep him in check." But nothing changed. If anything, the barking got worse. I started keeping a log, tracking his barking scientifically. Time stamps, duration, triggers. My notebook became a testament to my growing obsession. 2:17 a.m., bark. 4:33 a.m., bark. 6:52 a.m., bark. Each notation was another cut into my dwindling patience. I tried earplugs, white noise machines, even moving my bedroom to the opposite side of the house. But Max's voice seemed to pierce through everything. One morning, after another sleepless night, I snapped. I banged on their door at 6 a.m., disheveled and furious. "Do you even hear that dog?" I shouted as Mark opened the door. "He's driving me insane." Mark looked at me, tired and apologetic. "I'm sorry, Daniel. We're doing our best, but Max is important to our family. We can't just get rid of him." One night, after 3 hours of relentless barking, I hit my breaking point. I sat on my couch, shaking with frustration, glaring at the small bottle of rat poison I'd bought earlier that day. I told myself it was justified. I'd tried everything else. I wasn't a bad person, I just needed my life back. Months of sleep deprivation, of feeling powerless, of maintaining a facade of calm had eroded my humanity, grain by grain. At around midnight, I crept into the Thompsons' backyard. Max was in his kennel, barking at the moon or a shadow or nothing at all. I threw a piece of steak laced with poison into the kennel and left without looking back. The barking stopped a few hours later. The next morning, I heard crying. Not just any crying. Heartbroken, gut-wrenching sobs. I peeked out my window and saw Sarah and Ethan sitting on the front porch, holding Max's lifeless body. Mark was on the phone, pacing angrily. His voice carried over the fence. "I don't know what happened. He was fine yesterday. Do you think someone did this on purpose?" My stomach churned, but I convinced myself it wasn't my fault. Max was just a dog after all. He was causing problems and I solved them. Restored order. That's all there was to it, or so I thought. 2 days later, I overheard Sarah talking to another neighbor, her voice shaky and tearful. "Max wasn't just a dog," she said. "He was Ethan's therapy dog. Ethan has autism, and Max helped him stay calm, feel safe. He hasn't slept in 2 days since Max died. He keeps asking where his best friend went." I froze. Therapy dog? Ethan's best friend? That night, as I lay in bed, the full weight of what I'd done hit me. I hadn't just silenced a barking dog. I destroyed a lifeline for a vulnerable child. Ethan Thompson, the quiet 8-year-old who lived next door, was autistic. To the untrained eye, he might have seemed withdrawn, but Max understood him in ways no human could. Where others saw a challenging behavior, Max saw a soul that needed protection, comfort, understanding. When Ethan would become overwhelmed by sensory stimuli, Max would press against him, grounding him. When social interactions became too complex, Max provided a buffer, a safe space. Those barks I found so maddening were often Max's way of creating a protective sonic barrier around Ethan. The next morning, I saw Ethan outside, clutching a stuffed animal, tears streaming down his face. He was talking to the empty kennel, as if Max might magically appear. "I miss you, Max," he whispered. "Why did you have to leave?" I felt sick. Later that day, Mark put up flyers around the neighborhood. "Did you see anything? Our dog was poisoned." The whispers started soon after. The neighborhood that had prided itself on politeness now buzzed with hushed conversations, suspicious glances, unspoken accusations. Who could do something so awful? What kind of monster poisons a dog? Whoever did it should be arrested. I avoided everyone, staying inside as much as possible. But the guilt was suffocating. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. Some actions cannot be undone, some harm cannot be repaired. But carrying this burden alone has become unbearable. To the Thompsons, to Ethan, I am the nameless monster who stole more than just a dog. I stole a source of comfort, of security, of unconditional love. I killed Max because I couldn't handle the barking. I killed him without knowing the full story, without understanding how important he was to Ethan and the Thompsons. Now every time I hear Ethan crying or see Sarah's empty smile, I'm reminded of what I did. I wish I could take it back. I wish I'd found another way, but I can't. Our neighborhood still looks perfect from the outside. Lawns remain trimmed, mailboxes stand straight, but something fundamental has changed. The bark that used to penetrate every wall of silence is now gone, and in its absence, we are left with a deafening, unbearable quiet. My name is Daniel Harrison, and I am the reason a child lost his best friend. Do you think I'm a monster? We listen, we don't judge? Or do we?